Oliver Condy, welcome to the FORTE podcast. It's so great to have you here and to finally see you again after so many years.
Yeah, you did some work experience with us, didn't you?
Yes.
Quite a while back, actually,
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
Back in Bristol. No, it was great to have you, and it's brilliant to have you here. So, and you've come down to Somerset, so you've come to me, you know.
It's a beautiful drive there, so it's okay. It was a very nice drive. I just want to really touch brief back on your early career, because I feel like we had, or still have, something in common. Is that when you were starting out in your music journalism career, you were interested in music and you were interested in journalism, and you combined the two to do music journalism, which is something I'm doing right now. I just think, can you just talk a bit about that history in your life? Why did you combine those two together?
Well, I never did music as a kind of GCSE or A-level or degree, except that later on I did do an MA in organ performance studies. That was more a kind of, I want to do this is my passion. Before then, I suppose my parents gave me the advice, and it was probably quite good advice, that the music will always be there. I'll always have it. You know, if I wanted to play the organ, I wanted to sing in a choir, I wanted to play the violin, you know, I could always do it, always join a group in my free time. And so the main thing I concentrated on was English and French, and particularly the writing side. So in fact, the passion for music quite neatly married with my passion for writing in English. So I sort of went forward with that and sort of tried to combine it and pestered people, really, and ended up getting a work experience at Classic FM magazine, which was brilliant, actually, because there was a real sense of fun with that magazine. You know, there was a real sense of not treating classical music too seriously, but treating it seriously enough. So it sort of knocked a few kind of snobbish corners off me. You know, when you're a youngster and you're playing music, you know, you do have these preconceptions. You do have these opinions about music, that it should be performed that way, or it should be, you know, listened to reverently, or it should be appreciated in that way. And actually you realise when you work for a magazine like Classic FM Mag that there are all sorts of people who listen to music, and all sorts of ways to listen to music, and all sorts of ways to perform it. And so that was great. And I took that forward, that passion for magazines. I mean, Haymarket was a great company, but then I was offered the job at BBC Music Magazine. I mean, that was back in 2004, and I was 29. I didn't know what I was doing still. I really didn't. So I learnt on the job. I learnt on both jobs, actually. And over 17 years, I was there 17 years and only left about 6 months ago. But I sort of, you know, it grew with me and I grew with it. So it's been my life, really. Music and writing has been my life, and I will always be with me. I will always do that. No matter what else I do, music and writing will be a large part of my life.
Were you quite, let's say, I guess, nervous starting out a career in music journalism?
No, I was really excited.
Yeah.
I think you mould your life to it, don't you, really? And when you're young, you sort of don't think that it's going to be finite. You just get on with the job, I think. You just get on with it. And it's really exciting work. I remember when I was at Classic FM, you know, the first week I was there, I went to a champagne reception every day for the first week. And I thought to myself, well, this can't be bad, can it? You know, most of my friends are training to be accountants and financial advisors, and although they probably would earn a lot more money than me, I was definitely having a lot more fun than they were. So, and the travel was wonderful as well. You know, I got to travel to some amazing places to see some amazing musicians, festivals and orchestras in strange places. And, you know, that really contributed to the enjoyment of the job. Because it's quite an intensive job, as you probably remember. You know, there was a lot of heads down, getting the pages out, making sure that the magazine went to press on time, and it always did go to press on time because it had to, because there were 30 or so titles queuing up for the printers. You know, certainly at Immediate Media, from BBC Wildlife to BBC History to all the craft titles so you have to hit that slot. So it is quite intensive, but then there are these wonderful opportunities to meet artists, to meet your heroes, to phone up your heroes. I mean, I've done hundreds of phone interviews with people I would never imagine. and that's been magical, actually.
Do you have any memorable interviews that you've done?
I remember, well, in Face to Face, I remember going to New York to interview Renee Fleming, and that was wonderful. That was a very special experience. And going down to John Eliot Gardner's farm and had lunch with him over the table. He was sitting opposite me, and you're talking about the finer points of the Bach cantatas, because he'd just completed the cycle on SDG, or rather, it had just been all released. They were all recorded during the pilgrimage, but they had just all been released. And that those kind of moments when you combine a sort of sense of ordinariness with the exalted world of Bach cantatas is very special, actually. John Eliot Gardner really, I'm sure, would probably call himself a dairy farmer before he called himself a conductor. I don't know. Certainly they're very, very close in importance. And that's, I think, when you realise that there's a lot more to the world than music. And that makes actually writing about music, I think, more interesting. Yeah.
So other things, non-musical, feeds into the musical?
I think so.
Yeah.
Definitely. When you are with a musician and they're talking about their passion for Japanese literature, or they're talking about their passions for the theatre, or their dual life as a mother or father, or that kind of thing. Because music is something that is inherently part of our lives, but it is only a part of our lives, and there's a danger that one can let the music completely take over. But music plays into everything. Music feeds off everything, and everything feeds off music. And I think to get those contacts are really, really important. I mean, especially in interviews. There's no point talking to a musician simply talking about the music they perform and that particular project. That's why I think it's important when you do interviews to go and see people face to face as much as possible. And that's why it's been so frustrating during the pandemic. Because, interviewing a great artist is all very well, but to see them on their home soil, they behave differently. They're different people.
That's something I actually discovered too, in my music journalism, especially for this podcast. And it also influences the questions I ask too. I think I'm not criticizing the sort of music journalists out there who talk about the performance and talk about the CDs and all that stuff, but I think there's more to people, especially musicians, other than their music.
I mean, look, John Eliot Gardner was wandering around trying to find the ingredients for the lunch he was supposed to give me because his wife at the time was ill. And so, that threw him off balance. That caught him slightly. And that's a good thing. And then we used to do photo. I mean, Roger Norrington, who has a beautiful house down in Devon, because we did a photo shoot with him. I wasn't there, but the photographs sort of radiate happiness. They radiate a certain relaxed atmosphere, and that came across in. I think that was Tom Service who did that interview, and that came across in that. I think it's crucial.
Yes.
To make people feel relaxed.
Yes, and also to discover the human side of them as well, outside of music. I think that's also very important.
Yeah, I agree.
Just to quote Jeremy Paxman's book title, "A Life in Questions," would you say that's your life too? A life in questions, asking questions, curiosity.
Yeah, I think you have to be very curious, don't you, in this world? Because at the end of the day, a music magazine or writing about music can become quite formulaic. When you're writing a review or you're writing a feature, it's all too easy to fall into the same traps, ask the same questions. If you know a piece of music backwards, it's almost like treading a familiar path. And what you want to do is find out, the things that wouldn't necessarily occur to you, or more importantly, wouldn't occur to them about the music, about the circumstances of the performance. So yes, I think the more questions you ask, the more interesting you're going to make your product, your content. It's a constant lifelong journey, I think. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. How how do you ask more interesting questions, in your opinion?
You completely and utterly surround yourself with the music. Completely. And just lock yourself away and listen and listen and listen and just prepare. There's nothing quite like the 6 Ps, which is proper preparation prevents bleep poor performance. And I think that's really important. There's no point turning up to an interview with someone if you don't know their past, you don't know what they're planning, you don't know their current projects. And I remember when I went to Chicago to interview Riccardo Muti, and I dug up some really old programs from when he was with the Philadelphia Orchestra. And these programs hadn't been seen by anyone in years. It just so happened that a friend of mine had them in his collection and gave them to me. And I asked him a question about something I saw in that program. And the moment I asked that question, he visibly relaxed. He leant forward, he put his hand on my knee, and he went something like bravo or something like that. And I was taken by surprise, but he then he must have done hundreds of interviews, but then there was a certain bond, a certain trust. And you'll get more out of the artist if you surprise them with those details. It's like when you listen to Desert Island Discs. I remember Kirsty Young interviewing Tom Hanks, and it was only through her and presumably her colleagues' really solid research, they dug up some really minute details in his life and adding up to such an intense experience that they reduced him to tears. Not in an unsubtle way, but in a very controlled and rather beautiful way. And I think that you can learn a lot from that.
This is something I've been conflicted about when I'm doing my interviews as well. It's the balance between doing a lot of research but also leaving room in the interview for a little surprise yourself. Because sometimes I think when you prepare a lot about an individual, you know everything about them, and you can almost predict what they'll say, especially if they're famous. They've done many interviews and they've answered many questions, and when you do your research, you can almost predict what they're going to say. So sometimes I have this trouble balancing knowing just enough to leave something for myself to be surprised about.
Don't take extensive notes into the interview. That's what I would say. Do take questions to fall back on, because we all get to the point when we go, I don't know what I'm going to ask next. Hang on. We all get to that in the interview. And it's a very, early on in my career, I remember doing that a few times, and I sort of blush because I think, oh goodness, that was Nigel Kennedy. Actually with Nigel Kennedy, my mini disc recorder didn't work. So I got back to my hotel room and discovered the disc was blank. So I'd completely lost an hour's interview with Nigel Kennedy. But what I would say about preparing an interview is, first of all, check your recording equipment works, which yours clearly does.
Yes.
But also to do the intensive preparation and then to leave it a day. Don't do the last minute mugging up. I mean, we're all guilty of that, frankly. We're all guilty of thinking, I've got to interview Daniel Barenboim in 5 minutes. What am I going to ask him? Actually, that's a bad example because I wouldn't do that because that would be stupid. but I think it's important when you've got a major interview to just let it all, ferment, like a good homebrew that I'm making at the moment. I think it's important not to get too worried about a list of questions and to let it follow its own path. And then transcribe the interview as soon after the interview as you if you're writing it down, that is, transcribe it as soon afterwards as you can, and then write up as soon as after as you can. Then everything is in there, from the preparation to the questions to the writing up, and then you'll get a decent narrative. Because you need to capture the spirit of the person. You need to remember their spirit. What you don't necessarily forget is the content of an interview. What you do forget sometimes are the little bits of spirit, little bits of character.
So that's the justification for writing it straight after.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the spirit is still there,
there's
still
so
present.
Much to capture. Absolutely, yeah. There's so much to capture. I think it's really important to get on with it. Keep those deadlines. They're there for a reason. They're there to help you as much as they are to help the publication or whatever you're writing for.
during your sort of long career as editor for BBC Music Magazine, is there one artist you haven't had the chance to interview but would love to?
Goodness. Do you know, I really wanted to interview Peter Herford, and he died not that long ago. And it's one of my regrets that I never said, come on, let's do an interview, because I'm sure he would have done, because by all accounts, he was the most charming man. And I've always worshipped his Bach performances on the organ. I mean, you know, anybody who records the complete works of Bach is, in my mind, a hero. And there are a few organists who've done that. Most recently, David Good, who's done the most incredible cycle, I think, on the Merton College organ in Oxford. But Peter Herford's, despite being recorded in the 70s and 80s, has remained a benchmark. I mean, that's extraordinary. When I say benchmark, I mean that his performances are just so beautiful and so well considered, and the organs sound to my ears just so perfect for the repertoire. Of course, there are one or two chorale preludes that I'd probably listen to someone else perform, but on the whole, 99% of it is incredible, and I wish I'd had the chance to sit down and discuss it with him, because it's the recording I'm probably most passionate about.
Is there a particular question you want to ask him? A specific question?
I would want to ask him about the process of recording, because when you're recording every single piece that Bach ever wrote for the organ, you're talking about 16 CDs worth.
Wow.
You know, that's a lot. And it was a big undertaking by Decca at the time. You know, Decca would never, ever commission an organist to record the complete works of Bach now. Those were back in the days when people were buying LPs and cassettes, and, of course, newly in the early 80s, CDs. So I would have liked to have asked him whether, in fact, he sort of learnt them as he was going along. You know, I've got to record this prelude and fugue and this staccato and fugue and these chorale preludes next week. Well, we better get on with it, kind of thing. You know, that's not how artists work these days. You know, so many recordings now. In fact, I would say the vast majority of recordings are projects that artists are passionate about. You don't really get that many opportunities. Sorry, record companies don't say to an artist, we need this recording, will you do that? It's usually a collaboration. You know, an artist might say, as in, well, I've just been listening to Joseph Moog's performances of Rega for the Onyx label, and Onyx wouldn't have gone to him saying, you know, what we need is some more Rega. They would have sat down and said, well, what do you want to record? What are your strengths? And Joseph would have said, yeah, well, I've always wanted to learn the Rega piano concerto. Well, let's do it. And then that's how it went. It didn't work in the past because record labels had to fill in the gaps in their catalogue. Now the gaps have been filled in many, many, many times over. So the luxury is there for an artist to do what they want to do.
So, yeah. So there's more opportunities. What you're saying, there's more opportunities for artists these days to go for projects that they want to, rather than dictated by the record companies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If you look at the major record companies, people like the Warners and Decca, you know, they're having to look for opportunities to sell their music as soundtracks to film, soundtracks to advertisements, you know, choosing artists that are going to appeal to a much wider market than the classical market, you know, hence this new sort of post-classical genre, which sort of bridges, it's the new crossover, if you like. You know, the crossover with Russell Watson and Catherine Jenkins has sort of gone and been replaced by the muffled upright piano and the digital effects and the kind of atmospheric stuff pioneered by Max Richter sort of all those years ago. And so the major labels are doing that to sort of make up ground, if you like. Whereas the smaller labels are king because they're the ones with the smaller numbers of staff. You know, one recording engineer, an editor, probably the same person who does the engineering. The overheads are a lot less. Artists are not paid by smaller labels. They're generally given CDs. It's generally kind of like a calling card, if you like. You know, artists will make most of their money on the stage. if it weren't for a pandemic. I mean, which we may touch on later on, but the recording is a chance for the artist to show people what they can do, and then hopefully get invited to perform it on stage. So it's a different world now.
So it's not an end; it's a means for more opportunities. The CD is. It's
a means to an end. It's not a money making scheme. Nobody makes money from CDs these days. They're kind of pet projects, really, I think, and very important pet projects. It's a mark of an artist as they are at a particular moment. It's fixing in cement a project that they've been passionate about. It's a reminder to an artist of how they used to perform a Beethoven sonata, how they used to perform, a Mozart symphony.
Do you think modern and contemporary recordings are losing the uniqueness of an artist's sound? Do you think all recordings just sound very similar these days, or do you have a different opinion?
Gosh, that's a tricky one, because, of course, recording quality is so much better than it ever was. There's always a temptation when you learn a piece of music to go and listen to past recordings. That's the problem. There's always a sense that I'm going to learn, I don't know, a piece of Debussy on the piano. Therefore, I will go and listen to Jean-F. Babuzet, or I will go and listen to, I don't know, whether Maurizio Pollini plays some Chopin or Daniel Barenboim plays some Beethoven. There's a sense that I will visit the people who are best at playing that repertoire and try and mimic that, when what I should be doing is sitting down, looking at the music and interpreting it myself. And I think too many conductors today probably go back to the old, I don't know, Klemperer recordings, or they might go back to the early, I don't know, any number of conductors, the old Simon Rattle Mahler with the CBSO, and think, well, that's how I should do that, or So I think there probably is a bit more reliance on the old recordings, and therefore probably a bit less individuality. Having said that, I don't think the standard has ever been higher for younger artists, and I don't think that younger artists have ever been more articulate as well, and passionate about what they do. With social media and the opportunities to express themselves either in print or in podcasts or on the radio or on social media and Instagram, on Twitter, on YouTube. I think there is a new generation of artists, particularly in the pandemic, who have risen up and actually embraced an audience like the previous generation never did. And I think that's magical. I think that's wonderful. So if maybe recordings perhaps don't have that individuality, certainly the package does. Certainly the individuals who perform do have that individuality. There's some wonderful stars out there that are known as much for what they do in terms of communication, general communication, as their music making. I mean, take, for example, Randall Gusby, who's on Decca, or Elena Uriosta and Tom Poster, who that final couple did those wonderful broadcasts during the pandemic. Every so often they'd perform repertoire from Broadway to serious classical core repertoire, and to a growing audience all the way through. Kept us sane, certainly probably kept them sane, and communicated in the most joyful way possible. In a way that the generations before wouldn't have done. And in some ways, where was Martha Argerich and Daniel Barenboim and Stephen Kovacevic and Imogen Cooper and all those people were slightly missed the digital boat. They couldn't really grab that opportunity. They had to wait for that to pass. In the meantime, you've got this new generation of highly communicative, highly passionate and articulate musicians coming up and taking centre stage. It's been a really interesting time.
Has there been one young artist that's caught your attention that has done that?
Well, there's certainly been some artists who are established but younger. I mean, both the Capuçon brothers, Gauthier and Renaud Capuçon, they both embraced the opportunity to broadcast to their fans, and that was rather fantastic. particularly Gauthier Capuçon basically sat in his Paris flat and played solo cello, played pretty much a concert every day. So you have examples like that. And as I mentioned, Randall Gusby before, he is exceptionally passionate about discovering repertoire composed by black composers that simply haven't been discovered before. And that's a very magical thing too.
Yes. I especially like the sort of the big name performers just giving a very casual performance in their home. It's very different from the sort of concert recital. Whenever it's in their home, you feel like you're just there on their sofa and just watching them. There's this intimacy.
Igor Levit is another great example. I don't know if you've seen his stuff on Twitter, but again, he's someone who sort of embraced it and embraced it in such a way that I think it's now become part of him. I think he's known as much for his online concerts as he is for his really quite unusually programmed recordings.
Just on the topic of interpretation, before we move on to your fantastic book, just the last question of that segment. Going back to the recordings and younger musicians having a wealth of recordings to listen back to. And I think that with every successive recording, new interpretation is much, much harder to come by because every angle has been explored, almost. But then, in your opinion, how do we look for new angles of expression, new interpretation styles?
You've got to be bold, haven't you?
Bold.
Really bold. You've got to be willing to step outside. I mentioned Roger Norrington before.
Yes.
He was a trailblazer because he ignored what everyone else had done before. And, did what some people call quite controversial performances. Very odd speeds sometimes, strange approaches to articulation. Look at the harpsichordist Mahan Esfahani. Has got his big sort of carbon fibre harpsichord and plays the most remarkable repertoire on it without real... yes, he has his heroes, Wanda Landowska and others, but, Trevor Pinnock and Christopher Hogwood. But he really ploughs his own furrow. And I don't think there's anybody doing what he does, and I don't think he plays like anybody else at all. I think there is still so much scope for individual interpretation. And just people just have to be confident enough in their own abilities to say something about that piece of music. If you're going to record the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, have a reason for doing it. Have a reason for performing that piece of music. Don't just play it in the way that, Janine Jansen's done it, or Maxim Vengerov has done it. They've done it. They've been there. Their recording's fantastic. Thanks very much. Have a really good reason, whether it be the interpretation you use, or the score that you use, or the way the orchestra performs. I don't know, but have a reason.
Why do you think people are not bold enough to try new things, to try things that have never been done before?
Well, it's a sort of self-confidence, isn't it, really? But I think, actually, what I think the record industry really benefits now from is people discovering repertoire that hasn't been heard before. So I think that's the real sort of golden opportunity now, is recording repertoire that we don't know. The Stenhammers of this world, the long forgotten female composers, the black composers, the new music that's being written. Now composers seem to be new music has become a little bit more of a stronger currency. I think people are listening to a lot more new music than they did before, and I think these composers are being thrust into the limelight a little bit more than they were. So. Yeah, I think the appetite for different music, of all kinds, of unknown music, of unchampioned music, is what's really winning the day. Yes. And then, of course, you can put your own stamp on it. That's the great thing. Discover new music. You can have the confidence that no one has done it and play it how you want. And of course, that's how you should be playing music anyway. Everyone should be playing music how they want. And performance practice has a lot to answer for. treatises and research, and should we be performing Bach cantatas one to a part? Should we be listening to the Thomas Beecham performance of Handel's Messiah? Well, why not? With its massed huge orchestra and choruses. Well, why not? Just because some people think that it should be performed in a smaller group because it's more nimble and it's what Handel probably would have done. Well, would he? I don't know. If Bach had the opportunity to bring 200 people together to perform the St. Matthew Passion, I'm sure he would have done. And actually, we go around measuring organ lofts and assume that because you can only fit 15 people up there, that only 15 people performed a particular cantata on a specific week. Well, that doesn't mean to say they didn't put the musicians somewhere else and cobbled through. Nobody knows. Just do it how you want. The world's not going to end. Just do it convincingly and well and brilliantly.
Thank you very much. So, let's move on to your fantastic new book. The cameras can see. If you'd like to code it to your camera as well. Can you just give a brief description of what this book is about and who are your audiences for this book?
Well, anyone is an audience, frankly. We've all suffered a lot under the pandemic. I think emotions have risen to the surface. Everything from a sense of loneliness to a sense of vulnerability. Basic sadness, anxiety, panic, boredom. Little moments of joy. When we can reconnect with people. Either between lockdowns or actually on, thank goodness for Zoom. I talk to my parents every day during the pandemic, thank goodness for Zoom. And this book really sort of was born out of that sense that music can really heal all sorts of emotions. Everything. Whether it be in a direct way, so for example, you can choose a piece of music to try and get you through your melancholy, whether it be a melancholy piece of music or something a little bit more upbeat. Nobody likes being told to cheer up, do they, when they're feeling a bit down? So the sort of musical equivalent of a tearjerker, that cathartic experience. So I mix those kind of things with pieces of music that scientifically have been proven to help memory, to even help a hangover, even help with pain relief to a very small degree, help you overcome exhaustion maybe. Of course, music has been used in the treatment of Alzheimer's and dementia. That kind of, and those emotions really play into that very much. So, the book is, I suppose, an A to Z of emotions and music that can really sort of plug into those emotions and carry you through.
The thing I really enjoyed about this book is that every emotion had an historical story to it. Which I found very, very interesting, very, very insightful, actually, along the way.
I discovered that actually the composers are just like you and me. They're all vulnerable. They all went through strange experiences. They all have things to say in their music, which, containing all those experiences themselves. I write about loneliness in the book, and I mention Elgar's Enigma Variations, a portrait of his dear friends and wife and colleagues, and his publisher, famously, Augustus Jaeger, which he wrote into the Nimrod movement, one of the most generous, big-hearted pieces of English music you could ever imagine. And, if you are feeling lonely, you listen to the Enigma Variations and you're surrounded by all these wonderful people, these witty, generous, loyal friends. Because Elgar himself was lonely. He moved to Malvern from London and felt incredibly isolated. Because his wife was, socially quite high up. She was a bit of a social climber. And Elgar wasn't. Edward Elgar wasn't. He never really forgot his roots as the son of a Worcester shopkeeper, and I think he felt intimidated by the Malvern set, if you like, and was quite an introverted person. And Augustus Jaeger, the publisher I mentioned, was begging him to keep composing despite his depression. And Nimrod is a sort of a thank you letter, if you like.
What was the whole process of research like? Did your sort of editorship at the BBC Music Magazine make it easier during the research because you've done?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Well, like during the during the 17 years at the magazine, I think all of us have acquired a strange sort of trivia, sort of pile of trivia about classical music. You know, stupid things like, I don't know, Percy Grainger inventing the sports bra, or tales of Brahms going to his favourite cafe every afternoon, composing in the morning, going to his cafe in the afternoon. You know, those kind of things. You know, those sort of strange tales that you wouldn't necessarily pick up, and probably would take you a long time to research. You know, they're there buried somewhere. So that's been useful, because a magazine is kind of full of those tidbits of information. You know, it's not just long features of things. It's lots of little collections of information, and they somehow get lodged in your brain. So it was starting with that, and then knowing where to look, I suppose.
Yep.
Thank goodness for the internet as well.
Yes.
You know.
That makes it a lot easier.
Well,
Yes.
actually, there's a wonderful website where you can get lots of out of copyright books and read every single page. You know, there's a biography of Stanley Kubrick, and I discovered in there the story of the soundtrack to 2001: A Space Odyssey. And the original composer, Alex North, was commissioned to write the score at very, very short notice in the style of Richard Strauss. You know, if you listen to the original score, you definitely hear those echoes of Also Sprach, Zarathustra. But it was when he went into the premiere, it was only then that he realised his score had been replaced by Strauss itself. So,
just coming on to the final question now for the podcast. What is the importance of music journalism? What is the purpose of it? Apart from, if we assume that it's there to impart information, what else can you say that makes our job purposeful?
well, we're in the business of getting people excited, I think, about music, about reminding people that classical music isn't dead. It's a living art form. Yes, the vast majority of music is about dead and inevitably white male composers, you know, but those are assumptions that we need to challenge again and again and again. That music is joyful, that music is beautiful, that music is continually changing, that it's something worth exploring, that it's valuable, and that, you know, hopefully reflected in the book I wrote, that it can enrich your soul, that it can be part of your everyday life. You know, music is not a luxury. Music is an essential part of life, and you know, that's what good music journalism does. It invites you in. It says, hey, the water's great. Come in and try it. You know, that's what good music journalism should do. That's what I think a lot of it fails to do. But I think that's what it needs to do. I think it far too often navel gazes and, you know, assumes a lot of knowledge and talks to a very small audience. But I think that great journalism, and I certainly learned this at Classic FM and BBC Music Magazine, it needs to be as open as possible. You need to talk to the beginner as much as you're talking to the connoisseur. You need to be able to communicate those ideas to, you know, my mum needs to be able to understand it as much as the concert pianist, you know, and hopefully we achieve that. And that's something I certainly tried to do in the book. So,
Well, Oliver Condy, thank you very much.
thank you so much.